I really like LeBron, but I think if Jordan had cherry picked what teams he wanted to be on and two other superstars, he would won 15 championships.
David Falk said something the other day about LeBron cherry picking, and they was talking about it this morning, and I'm like, that's interesting to use the term cherry picking when, if we're going to make a fruit basket here, maybe I'll sing you one after I leave for having me on the show.
Thank you, Rich.
But the careers of the LeBron and Michael Jordan, it's not apples and apples for a number of reasons. But the cherry picking terminology of it all, coming from someone who literally had John Thompson, Dean Smith, and Mike Krzyzewski supporting his business, putting superstar athletes in his lap. I think he was part of the Cherry Clan. I used to sell. My dad used to sell that candy back in the day. I just thought that was very unfair and a little beneath David Falk for a number of reasons. And so we can't have revisionist history, and we all want to just determine who's the GOAT and who's the best and so on and so forth. But I just thought that was a little beneath David to say that. And I'll table that there. But
Well,
again, the cherry pick, I've discussed that. The two other superstars, Michael never had to leave. Michael's never been the underdog in any finals.
That's a lie. In the 1991 NBA Finals, the Chicago Bulls were slight underdogs against the Los Angeles Lakers, but the odds were close. The Lakers had about a 56% chance of winning the series, while the Bulls had roughly a 46% chance of winning.
Not one time. Michael never had a 24-hour, 365 news cycle. He never had shows built strictly to criticize him. People made millions of dollars criticizing LeBron James. That was their entire job. And when you talk about the difficulty of it all, Michael played for Dean Smith, Michael played for Phil Jackson, and Michael had Jerry Krause. I'm the biggest Michael Jordan fan ever. I love Michael Jordan. And I don't think Michael Jordan would have used the term cherry pick, so I'm not up here to discredit Michael Jordan. I think Michael Jordan transcended our game to a level that we all benefited from, right? And I'm more so focused on less about who's the GOAT and why I can't be at a dinner with those two guys having a great conversation, or why I can't put, a little bit of the money that I've earned into a fund that those two guys have formulated so we can be a part of the deal flow from the Blackstones and the Apollos and the Andreessen Horowitz and things of that nature. Mm-hmm. And I think that those type of comments is also the reason why people that look like me in my community always think there can only be one king. And it's forever embedded us as the minority in a lot of places, and why it's so uncommon to see a community of successful black men. So I thought that was very, again, beneath David Falk with all the success he's had and all the cherry picking that he's been able to do amongst the three highest level universities there could ever be as it pertains to aligning with the game of basketball. It doesn't get any bigger than Georgetown, North Carolina, and Duke. So he actually has a bag of cherries, So I'll leave that there, though.
Rich Paul here on the Rich Eisen Show. If I may also just follow up on what I think is kind of a subtext of what he's saying as well, that also dovetails into what a lot of media members have said about LeBron's business strategy as a player in this league, is that he runs the team that he's on, that he makes the decisions about roster and he makes decisions about coaches. And I would love to put that in front of you and how you would respond to that.
And that's false. I think that, and I can say that because I'm there.
Right.
And when you think about that and that narrative, people don't think about the impact that that has off the court, right? It hurts friendships, guys that play on teams, because they feel like, hey, I may have been traded and it's because you wanted me out of here, right? And I know that is not to be true. There's something to be said when someone come to you and say, hey, what do you think about this guy? You may say, or you may not even want to comment at all. And they come back and they come back and they come back. And you say, you know what, that's what you want to do, go ahead. That's not you making a decision. That's you agreeing with something because, okay, cool, if that's what you guys feel is the best thing to do, do it. I don't own the team. I'm not in the front office. You know, it clearly he don't run the team because there's things that transpired that he didn't even know about. So
like the Luka trade is what you're saying?
Yeah, so how is he running the team? The Westbrook trade, you know, he didn't make that trade, contrary to what people try to put out there. He did not make that trade. And I know that for a fact. So I think those things are, there's one thing to have power and influence, and there are guys who earn the right for some decisions to be, you know, ran past you, or so for some teams to say, hey, what do you think about this? Or, yeah, that's earned. We've all been in those rooms and that's earned. But there's a fine line because you can also put yourself in a situation where, for example, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is now on the Oklahoma City Thunder. Maybe he should be there, maybe he shouldn't. He's the MVP today, so obviously he should.
Are you referring to when he was a Clipper?
But
and
when he
how
was a Clipper,
and how when Kawhi got there?
Whoever made the decision, I don't know who it was or whatnot, you have to relive that now, right? Because if you're putting it on the player, if you're putting it on the front office, you know, there's so many decisions to be made. And again, we can't confuse someone asking a player for an opinion and that being the decision that's being made. Those are two separate things. And I deal with all of them, players and front offices. Those are two separate things. You make decisions at a front office and you live with the results. That's why you get paid the money that you get paid to be in that position. As a player, I don't think players are in the position to make a specific decision all the time due to the fact that they're not doing the diligence that the front offices are doing to make that decision. Because it's one thing to date somebody, it's another thing to live with them.
I love your sayings, man.
It's true.
Oh, yes, it is.
Yeah.
You said what you said. You've had an opportunity to reflect on what you had to say about LeBron James in comparison to Michael Jordan. The floor is yours. What would you like to say now?
Let me say at the outset, clearly LeBron James is a great player in any era. You'd be foolish to suggest otherwise. His longevity, his statistics are amazing. I think what makes Michael the GOAT goes way beyond the court. I think on the court, Michael obviated the center position. Prior to Jordan, you needed the Elijah Wans, the Ewings, the Kareems, the Bob Lanairs. And the way Michael played, he made it unnecessary to have a great center. Look who he won the championship with: Bill Weddington, Dickie Simpkins, Bill Cartwright. And I think that had a huge impact on the game. Secondly, and perhaps even more importantly, I think Michael individually broke down every barrier that existed for professional basketball players, and in particular African-American professional basketball players, to become national marketing brand ambassadors. So the whole generation of LeBrons and Kobe's and Steph Curry's having their own shoes and being in commercials did not exist before Michael came in the game. Magic didn't have it. Bird didn't have it. Dr. J didn't have it. Kareem didn't have it. And I think that's a preponderant impact. I think third, I believe he's the first NBA player to become a billionaire. I believe he's the first NBA player to become a majority owner of an NBA team. And finally, he had a tremendous impact on fashion. He changed the look of the way the players play with the long shorts. He made bald as beautiful. And so I think beyond comparing statistics, who had more points, who averaged more, even who had more championships, I think Michael's impact is extremely broad and deep in what he did to change the game. I don't think any other player in history had that kind of an impact.
What do you make of people who would look, and I want to get far beyond those two individuals that we're talking about for the moment, but I got this one question to ask you. What do you make of folks and their assertions that the times that we're living in now, the advent of social media, the digital stratosphere, the microscope that is on players in today's game like never before. The impression is given that even the great Michael Jordan, with his unparalleled popularity, I compare him to no one. The only person I've ever compared him to was Michael Jackson, for crying out loud. That's how popular Michael Jordan was. When you listen to people talk today, they talk about the climate, the environment, the society that we're living in today, and they say it's far more invasive than it has ever been, which makes the road tougher for a guy like LeBron James compared to what Jordan had to endure during his playing career. You've been around a long time. You know this business like the back of your hand. What do you make of that, of those assertions?
Clearly, social media has brought the fans closer to the players. Everyone can express their opinion. You don't have to work for a newspaper or a television station to have an opinion. But I think it's the natural tendency when you're the best at anything, there's a human tendency to try to tear people down. And certainly Michael had that because of his immense popularity. People criticize him, for example, for not being political enough, not expressing his desire for certain candidates. And so, sure, I think that the social media has changed the game. I also think if you want to be objective, the game has changed itself. I had this discussion about a month ago with Rod Thorne, who's a very dear friend of mine, who drafted Michael Jordan. And he said to me, which I didn't know, he said, do you realize today that the average NBA team takes 1/3 more shots than they did in Jordan's era? So when Jordan averaged 38 points a game, if you increase that by 1/3, that means he would average 52. Now, I think Michael could have averaged, and Michael took 1.7 threes per game. That's all he took. I think he could have averaged almost anything he wanted if that was what was required to win. That's all he cared about, was winning. And I think his record of 6 out of 6 is the greatest in the history of the NBA. Never lost the championship.
Well, don't forget, he also never allowed a championship series to get to a 7th game. He took you out in 6 or less every single time. That's the Michael Jordan that we're talking about here. David, expanding beyond Michael Jordan and LeBron James, when we think about the age that we're living in, one of the discussions your comments prompted was player empowerment and the kind of things that have taken place in today's NBA and in today's sports world. As an agent, looking at the state of affairs that exist, not just in the NBA, but professional sports, as it pertains to sovereignty involving players, player empowerment, et cetera, what are the kind of thoughts that come to your mind as to what we're witnessing today and whether or not it's good or it's bad for the world of sports in this day and age?
Great question. So number one, I believe that great players, have always been in power. I think the biggest difference between today's generation of players and, if you will, Jordan's generation, the Magic's generation, is how the players exercise the power. Now, if you understand that in 1982, that was a long time ago, the NBA ushered in a salary cap. And for the last 43 years, the players have essentially owned 50% of the revenues. So they're 50-50 partners with the league. The only way players can make more money is to grow the business of the NBA. Now, I believe that when players exercise the power poorly and they make statements that denigrate the game, I think that they're impeding the ability of themselves to make more money, which is foolish. So I'll give you a couple of examples. You want to talk about player empowerment? In 1984 and 1985, there were 2 players in the history of the game that opted out of the group licensing program. One was named Michael Jordan. One was named Patrick Ewing. They did not allow the league to use them in group licensing. And I opted out of both of them. You're not allowed to do that today. In 1985, Patrick Ewing became the first player in history to have an early termination option in his contract. He signed a 10-year deal for 3 times more money than Magic made the year before as a veteran. And he had the option to opt out after 6 years if market conditions change. That is empowerment. Michael Jordan was the first player to have a love of the game clause that did not require him to that allowed him to practice at North Carolina in the summer, which came to be known as the love of the game clause. Darnell Valentine in 1980 became the first player to challenge the league's ability under paragraph 13B to prevent players from doing endorsements or interviews without permission of the team. That's in every contract now, Valentine versus the Portland Trailblazers. So I could give you 100 examples of player empowerment. Patrick Ewing became the first rookie in history to be the highest paid player in the league. He made 55% more money than Kareem, who's the highest paid veteran of all time. I believe that that's empowerment. Danny Ferry did the same thing in 1990, and he clearly was not one of the great players in the history of the league. So I believe that players in every sport have always had tremendous power. But I think that today, I don't think they use it as judiciously as they should if the goal is to make more money and grow the business.
Well, let me ask you this, David. Give me an example, if you can. If it's compromising, please don't bother. But if you can, give me an example of players that have exercised influence and exercised power, but you don't believe it's necessarily for their good or for the good of the game. Could you highlight an example that wouldn't be good to illustrate your point?
Well, so the simplest one I would say is triggers. Okay. Now, I personally probably made 10 or 15 major trades. I made the Patrick Ewing trade to Seattle. I didn't want to make it. I didn't believe in it, but he and the Knicks agreed it would be best to have a change of scenery. It was a 13-player trade. I traded Stephon Marbury to New Jersey in a 13-player trade with Sam Cassell. I did that behind the scenes. The minute you announce publicly as a player that you're not going to play anymore, Harden as an example, it makes it so much harder to make the trade for the exact reason that Rich Paul indicated is hard for LeBron, because you're shining the spotlight on the player, and the other teams around the league know that the player is demanded a trade. He doesn't want to be there. There's going to be a problem. And so they're not going to offer fair value. And so the very goal the player has of moving, he frustrates or makes more difficult by publicly announcing it. Now, the opposite of that, interestingly to me, and I'm a big Nico Harrison fan, is the fact that Dallas only talked to one team to trade Luka. Luka's one of the top 5 players in the league, and there wasn't competitive bidding. I know they had their reasons for it. I don't understand all the dynamics. So I'm not here to criticize it, but it surprised me that if you're gonna sell one of the most valuable assets in the league, that you wouldn't want to have the highest level of competitive bidding. But the trade is the easiest example I could give you, Stephen. Or now I'll give you an example on the agent side, okay? I believe that every time an agent comes out publicly and says any of the following: my player's not getting enough playing time, he's not getting enough shots, not making enough money, the team is taking advantage of them, they are advertising that they've done a really lousy job of being an agent. Because if they were doing a good job, none of those things would be happening. And if they were happening, then the answer is to sit down with the owner or the general manager behind the scenes and try to figure out a way to improve them. And I want to end by saying this is not last thing I want to say. In the day, Magic, Isaiah, Mark McGuire, Herb Williams, who I really like, represented by a guy named Charlie Tucker, who's a fun guy. I like Charlie. And our guys, they were more urban guys. Our guys all came, as Rich pointed out, from Carolina, Duke, Georgetown, Kansas, and the coaches basically gave us the players. They didn't do it to do us a favor. They didn't do it because they had any benefit. They did it because they wanted their players to make the most money that they could. And there was sort of like it was like the Bloods and the Crips. There was sort of a little competition during the All-Star game in '85. I won't name names. Some of the players from that group tried to recruit Michael to leave us and go with Charlie Tucker.
Mm-hmm.
And Michael was really offended because he's such an incredibly loyal person. And and so it's not a battle between Michael and LeBron. I think they're two of the greatest players in history. Not necessarily the two greatest players,
Right.
two of the greatest players in history. LeBron's earned my respect, a long time ago. And if I say anything that offended him, I would publicly apologize. Not my intent. I think it, as Michael correctly points out, maybe it's a good way to end the discussion. It is almost impossible to compare players from different eras. When Bill Russell won 11 titles, there were only 8 teams in the league. When UCLA won all those championships in a row, there was only 16 teams in the NCAA tournament. It's a lot easier. You start out in the Sweet 16. Today, getting to the Sweet 16 is a pretty good accomplishment for a lot of teams. But what I think separates Michael from every other player is not how many games he won or how many points he scored. It's the impact that he made on the game in so many different areas. As I mentioned earlier, being the first player to be a majority owner, the opportunities that he personally and individually created. There was a whole bunch of people, Stephen, after Jordan came to the league. It's like the search for the fountain of youth. They want to know, was Harold Miner, nicknamed Baby Jordan, was he going to be the next guy? Was Penny Hardaway going to be the next guy? At one point, it was going to be Ron Harper was going to be the next guy. And the truth is, there'll never be another Michael. They just won't. He came from an incredible family, 2-parent family, incredible coach. And so let's leave it that way.
Well, listen, we'll leave it that way. I mean, Michael Jordan is
You heard from both agents. LeBron's agent, Rich Paul, guy who's been basically controlling the NBA for the past 10 to 15 years. He's had his hand in so many trades. He's had his hand in so many title runs. Right? They signed Anthony Davis. Anthony Davis sat out so that he could be traded to the Lakers so that LeBron can get another top 5 player so that he can compete and actually win a title in 2020. Right? This is the guy also who I believe taught LeBron how to use leverage. And what I'm talking about is those 1 to 2 year deals where you don't sign a long-term deal. You sign a 1 year, 2 year deal so that the team that you're on, they got to do something, or you leave it in the back of their head that, okay, if you don't do something at the end of this year, if you don't do something at the end of this year or next year, he's going to be gone. Right? And this is how LeBron has used his contracts, right, done through Rich Paul, in order to control teams, in order to control Miami, in order to control the Cavs, in order to control the Lakers. Okay? LeBron's also has used Rich Paul as a speaker, okay? Because as you saw this year, there's been many times when something is said about Bron, you don't want to come out and talk. Who comes out and talk? Who gets on Pat McAfee's show? Rich Paul. Rich Paul comes out there, and of course, he expresses the ideas of LeBron James. Okay, so he's like a spokesman for LeBron James. He's not only an agent, he does a whole lot of things for LeBron James. Okay? A whole lot of things for LeBron. We could say he's LeBron James' right-hand man. All right, without him, things would be very different around LeBron and around the NBA in the past 10, 15 years. And did I forget about Bronny? Okay, that whole idea to get Bronny drafted and to get him drafted to the Lakers. Remember when Rich Paul was telling people, oh, if you draft Bronny, he's not going to play. Remember that? That was all Rich Paul. So Rich Paul, he been busy doing the work of LeBron. Okay? And David Falk as well. He's, before a lot of you guys started watching basketball, he was doing the work of Michael Jordan. And he helped Michael Jordan get the shoe deal. All right, he changed the game with the shoe deal. All right, for many years, Jordan, he wasn't even making that much money. He was underpaid. Well, obviously, he was underpaid every single year. But David Falk helped him get this deal with Nike, right? That still has him selling, millions and millions of shoes every single year. And, it's got him to almost $3 billion. Okay? So I'd have to say that David Falk has got to be the greatest agent. I got to say that. Okay? Just toward the tail end of, Jordan's prime when he was winning those titles, he was the highest paid in the league, of course. But even that, I could even have done that. But still, we got to talk about the marketing for the shoes. All right, that is I would say the most important thing, that came out of that relationship with Jordan and David Falk. Okay, but this whole beef that we're talking about now, okay, I got to side with David Falk, obviously. All right, number one, because I think that Rich Paul was saying a whole bunch of nothing as usual. Okay, and I just didn't like that he brought in this whole thing about African American. All right, I didn't think that was relevant. Okay, I think that this really should have just been stuck to basketball, kept at basketball, and the whole race thing should not have been brought up. Okay, David Falk, he talked about how, LeBron, basically cheated the game. He cherry picked his teams. Right? He brought in players that he wanted to bring in. And that's the truth. So you just got to accept that truth. Okay? But for Rich Paul to slap back, and talk about how MJ had the best of everything, I don't agree with that. Right? Number one, you want to talk about MJ having the best coach. All right, was he the best coach when MJ got there? That's the question. Was he the best? He was not. He wasn't seen as the best coach when MJ got there. Okay, after MJ won 6 titles with him, that's when everybody started considering him as the best coach. Then where did he go? He went to play with the most dominant center. He went to go play with, a prodigy who modeled his game and had the competitive nature of Michael Jordan. So I would like to say that Phil Jackson, right, is the greatest coach because of Michael Jordan and because of Kobe Bryant and because of Shaq, and not the other way around. Okay, these once-in-a-lifetime talents, he was able to help them win titles, and they were able to help him win titles. So this is not something where if Phil Jackson wasn't there, Michael Jordan wouldn't have been who he is, Kobe wouldn't have been who they are, and Shaq, they wouldn't have been, who he is. I don't think that is the case here. Okay? And then to have the best GM, Jerry Krause is nothing. Okay, God rest his soul. Jerry Krause, there's nothing special about Jerry Krause. Okay? For many, many years, he was on the brink of breaking that team up. Right? He got Pippen by fluke. By fluke, you got Pippen. And every year he wanted to trade Pippen. You go look it up. There are multiple trades from McGrady. Many times he didn't want to sign him back. He didn't want to give him money. He didn't respect Scottie Pippen. And that's clear. Everybody who was around that time, everybody who has read biographies, read about the Bulls, they know Jerry Krause didn't respect Pippen. He respected Jordan. He didn't respect Phil Jackson either. If it was up to him, Pippen and Jackson, they wouldn't have been there for maybe half of the years. Okay? Thirdly, you talk about having the best rebounder. He was only there for 3 of the 6 years. Before that, the power forward was Horace Grant. Okay, nothing special about him. Okay, he made an all-star team on the, I think it was on the Orlando Magic, but nothing. He's not the greatest rebounder of all time either. Okay, so Jordan won this, right, with 1 all-star, and he's the reason why that coach and GM have their names in the highlights. All right, LeBron intentionally set out to get superstars and to shift the balance, the advantage on his side. That's what he did. All right, no other NBA player in history has done this. And he's done this over and over and over again. And complained when others, followed in his footsteps, like KD. Right, and I'm happy that was done, because if not, how many titles would LeBron have won illegitimately? Okay, so I just think that Rich Paul was talking a whole bunch of nonsense in his interview, and David Falk kept it real as usual. So if there's somebody to take this whole war of words, I'm going to give it to David Falk, clearly, because Rich Paul, LeBron's spokesman, he's just saying things just to make LeBron, or to try to make LeBron look good. But they don't add up and they don't make sense. So that's about it. So until next time.